Japan shook again. On July 1st, 2026, a magnitude 6.0 earthquake struck off the coast of Iwate Prefecture. The earthquake produced a maximum seismic intensity of 4 on Japan's seismic scale. And it wasn't the only earthquake being recorded around the country. Japan's earthquake monitoring system continued detecting smaller earthquakes across different regions and offshore areas. For most countries, an earthquake like this would dominate the headlines. But in Japan, earthquakes are part of life. People practice what to do when the ground starts shaking. Buildings are engineered to move with the earth. Trains can automatically respond to seismic warnings. And millions of people live knowing that another major earthquake could one day strike. But here's what makes Japan's situation truly remarkable. The earthquakes aren't random. Beneath Japan, enormous tectonic plates are constantly moving. And offshore lies one of the most dangerous earthquake zones on Earth, the Nankai Trough. It has produced enormous earthquakes repeatedly throughout history. Scientists know another major earthquake will eventually happen there. What they don't know is exactly when. So why does Japan experience so many earthquakes? What happened during the earthquakes that changed the country forever? And what could happen when the next major rupture finally occurs? This is the story of why Japan keeps shaking. To understand Japan's earthquake problem, we need to look beneath the country. Because Japan isn't simply sitting next to one tectonic plate boundary, it sits in one of the most complicated tectonic regions on Earth. Several major plates interact around the Japanese islands. The Pacific plate moves toward Japan. The Philippine Sea plate is also being pushed beneath parts of southwestern Japan. And in several locations, oceanic crust is forced beneath other plates. This process is called subduction, and it is one of the main reasons Japan experiences so many earthquakes. Imagine two enormous pieces of Earth's crust. They're moving incredibly slowly, just centimeters at a time. To us, that sounds insignificant, but these plates are gigantic. And when one plate becomes locked against another, the movement doesn't stop. Instead, stress begins to build, year after year, decade after decade, sometimes for centuries, until eventually the rocks can no longer hold that energy. The fault suddenly slips, and the earth shakes. Japan's location gives it an unusual combination of earthquake sources. Some earthquakes occur deep beneath the ocean. Others happen closer to the mainland. Some are caused by movement along major subduction zones. Others occur on faults within the Earth's crust. And because Japan is surrounded by active tectonic boundaries, earthquakes can happen in many different parts of the country. But there's another reason earthquakes are such a serious threat here. Japan isn't just earthquake-prone. It's densely populated. Major cities stretch along the coastline. Millions of people live in urban areas. And critical infrastructure, ports, railways, roads, power systems, and industrial facilities is concentrated across these regions. So the danger isn't simply the earthquake. It's what happens when an earthquake strikes a place where millions of people live. Japan has experienced devastating earthquakes throughout its history. But one event changed the country's understanding of seismic danger forever. March 11th, 2011. At 2:46 in the afternoon, a massive earthquake struck off northeastern Japan. The magnitude was eventually determined to be 9.0, the largest earthquake recorded in Japan. The ground shook violently, but the greatest destruction was still coming. The earthquake displaced the seafloor, and that triggered a massive tsunami. Waves surged into coastal communities. Entire neighborhoods disappeared beneath the water. Roads were destroyed. Buildings were swept away, and the disaster eventually contributed to the Fukushima nuclear accident. The 2011 earthquake wasn't simply a geological event. It became a national tragedy, and it demonstrated something the world already knew, but perhaps hadn't fully appreciated. A massive earthquake can transform an entire country within minutes. But 2011 wasn't a one-time anomaly. Japan's history is filled with evidence of enormous earthquakes. In 1995, the Great Hanshin earthquake devastated the Kobe region. More than 6,000 people died. And long before modern instruments existed, Japanese communities experienced enormous earthquakes and tsunamis that were recorded in historical documents and geological evidence. These events reveal an important pattern. Japan's earthquakes aren't something that suddenly appeared in the modern era. The tectonic forces responsible have been operating for millions of years. But now we come to the part of the story that has scientists watching closely. Offshore from southern Japan is a massive underwater boundary known as the Nankai Trough. Here, the Philippine Sea Plate is being pushed beneath the plate carrying southwestern Japan. And this zone has produced enormous earthquakes repeatedly throughout history. Major earthquakes have occurred there in clusters, sometimes affecting enormous stretches of the coastline. The most recent great Nankai events occurred in 1944 and 1946. And today, the region remains one of Japan's most closely monitored earthquake zones. APAN's Earthquake Research Committee recently revised its long-term assessment of the Nankai Trough. Using one statistical approach, the estimated probability of a major Nankai Trough earthquake occurring within the next 30 years is 60 to 90% or higher. Another method produces an estimate of 20 to 50%. Both are classified in Japan's highest long-term risk category. Those numbers sound terrifying, but there's something extremely important to understand. This is not a prediction that an earthquake will happen tomorrow. It isn't even a prediction that it will happen this year. Scientists cannot currently determine the exact date of a major earthquake. These are long-term probability estimates based on geological history and statistical models. In other words, the risk is high, but the clock is unknown. This is one of the biggest misunderstandings about earthquakes. We can monitor faults, we can measure tiny movements in the Earth's crust, we can detect seismic waves, we can study earthquakes that happened hundreds of years ago. And Japan has some of the world's most sophisticated earthquake monitoring systems. Japan has learned to live with this reality. It has learned to build stronger, to warn faster, to evacuate sooner, and to respect the power beneath its feet. Because the real question isn't whether Japan will experience another earthquake. It will. The real question is, how big will it be? And how ready will Japan be when the ground moves again? And they aren't stopping. If you sticked with me until this minute, I really appreciate your time. Please subscribe for more.